My first memory as a child was watching a Mizzou football game on my dad's lap in the early 2000s. I have no idea which game it was or what year it was, but ever since that moment, I've been watching Mizzou football each and every Saturday. I could tell you pretty much each and every recruit from the past 10 years, I could tell you all the players, and I've been watching that team as close as anybody. With me doing YouTube in 2020, I started to cover the whole sport of college football, and at times I lost my passion for one singular team. I feel like every college football fan has to have that one team they root for, but because I was covering the sport as a whole, I kind of took an overview approach to watching games. But I've always maintained my love for Mizzou, and the last couple of seasons have been quite special. While the Elijah Drinkwitz era was kind of rough the first 3 years, last season was special. Mizzou ended up winning 10 plus games, they beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, and they had two incredible victories against both K-State and Florida, which came down to game-winning field goals. I was at the K-State game, and now Mizzou picked the right time to get good. As the playoff in the SEC expanded, the Tigers and Coach Drink picked the best time to stay good, as they grabbed a ton of good players in the portal, brought back some key pieces from last year, and were considered a top 10 team going into 2024. The fact that Mizzou was a preseason top 10 team and talked about in a national championship light was pretty crazy to me. Back in 2013 and 2014, Mizzou received a similar amount of hype, but this kind of hype has never been there since I started watching them. Mizzou honestly had a very favorable schedule in 2024, and while they are 4-0, there is a part of me that is getting ready to hit the panic button. I'm not saying that to be overly dramatic, but after struggling with Boston College for most of the game and almost blowing it to Vanderbilt in week 4, there still seems to be something off with Mizzou football. I know many of you guys know I'm a diehard Mizzou fan, and you've been waiting for me to give my thoughts on the team so far this year, and with them having a bye week this week, I felt this week was the perfect time to start talking about the Tigers. Today we're going to talk about how the 2024 season has gone so far, a few observations and things I'm currently worried about, and how I ultimately think they are going to finish the season as well. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Mizzou football and why I'm a little bit concerned. While Barry Odom is currently doing a great job at UNLV, at the end of the 2010s he was the head coach at Mizzou and sort of had the program plateau. He had a generational quarterback in Drew Lock, and besides that, he just didn't really recruit well, didn't have a ton of momentum, and never could beat the big teams. That led Mizzou to hire a new coach by the name of Elijah Drinkwitz. He was sort of a new hotshot offensive coordinator dude as he spent time at NC State, and after one season at Appalachian State, he'd take the Mizzou head coaching job instead of going over to Arkansas. At App State, he had two major wins against North Carolina and South Carolina, and immediately started recruiting well. His first big recruiting victory was Ennis Rakestraw, who's now in the NFL, and he quickly flipped Mizzou's roster and brought in a new mindset. Mizzou ended up doing decent in 2020, as they technically made a bowl game in year 1, but the game was canceled against number 15 Iowa in the Music City Bowl. Their big victory that year was against LSU 45-41, and besides that, they beat 4 teams that really weren't all that good. Players like Larry Roundtree and Tyler Beatty were on that team, and Connor Bazelak was the quarterback. 2021 was expected to be a step up for them, but ultimately they just really weren't all that good. They had a terrible blowout loss to Tennessee, got beat by Boston College on the road, and were also completely non-competitive against number 21 Texas A&M. Their big victory that year came against Florida, as they ended up having a crazy 2-point conversion to win that one. Then they ultimately went to a bowl game and lost to Army. From there, Mizzou had to move in a new direction at the quarterback position, and a 3-star kid by the name of Brady Cook would begin to take over. Mizzou ended up landing a player by the name of Luther Burden as well, and that was a huge victory for them. Drinkwitz was pulling in special recruiting classes, but in 2022, nothing really changed that much. They ended up getting blown out by K-State in week 2, lost a horrible game to Auburn on the road in overtime. Their best performance that year was almost beating Georgia, and they did have a victory on the road against number 25 South Carolina, but other than that, they just kind of cruised to 6-6, and then lost to Wake Forest in the Gasparilla Bowl. 2021 and 2022 were very boring seasons and very predictable seasons. Somehow though, in 2023, everything would change. It is that time of the year as winning season is back, football is back, and MyBookie is here to make sure you are ready to cash in on all the action. This season, MyBookie is pulling out all the stops with incredible promotions like a weekly risk-free boost on Thursdays where you can bet without a sweat. If your bet hits, you win big. If it doesn't, forget it. MyBookie will refund your wager. But that's just the beginning. MyBookie is giving away hundreds of thousands in prizes with their Super Survivor and Square contests. Get your entries now in for your shot at huge cash rewards. When you're ready to get started, be sure to use my promo code Fisher50 and make sure to get some extra cash on top of your first deposit. Okay, but what do you get when you use my promo code? Well, if you type in Fisher50, you'll get up to $1,000 in a welcome bonus bet plus a $10 casino chip. MyBookie's tiered bonuses make it easy to deposit with crypto or with credit. They brought back Brady Cook at quarterback. Cody Schrader was a sixth-year walk-on who started to emerge, and Luther Burden became a big-time receiver. Their defense was also loaded with talent, but after week 1 and 2, it didn't really look that much different. They barely squeaked by South Dakota, they almost lost at home to Middle Tennessee, and then they were struggling early with K-State. Luckily though, against the Wildcats, they would come back in that one, and ultimately they'd win that game by way of a Harrison Mevis 61-yard field goal. That one was insane. And then after that, they beat both Memphis and Vanderbilt, and Mizzou was all of a sudden 5-0 and ranked. They would have a showdown against number 23 LSU, in which they would have an opportunity to win, but Brady Cook threw a pick 6. After that, they were getting beat pretty badly against Kentucky on the road, but then ended up putting up like 38 unanswered points or something, and ended up beating the number 24 Wildcats on the road. After win over South Carolina, they had a showdown with number 2 Georgia, which would be the winner-take-all for the SEC East. No one really expected that, and Mizzou was driving in the fourth quarter with an opportunity to take the lead, but Brady Cook threw a terrible interception to one of the big defensive linemen, and Mizzou ultimately lost by 9. They did have a chance at a 10-2 season, and they would take it. They blew out number 13 Tennessee 36-7, survived against Florida after a 4th down miracle, and then killed Arkansas to finish at 10-2. In their bowl game against number 7 Ohio State, both teams had an equal number of opt-outs, but Mizzou found a way to win 14-3 after a strong second half. They finished the season with wins over 4 ranked opponents and had some really awesome players. Brady Cook became one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC, and Cody Schrader finished in the top 10 in the Heisman voting. Luther Burden was getting hype as a legitimate number 1 receiver in the 2025 NFL Draft, and Darius Robinson would become a first-round pick. Going into 2024, Mizzou ended up having a solid recruiting class, which was headlined by a top 10 recruit and 5-star by the name of Williams Winery. Besides that, they signed a handful of 4-star recruits and freshmen that have seen the field right away. The portal, Mizzou did a ton of damage as they landed a ton of impact players, including running back transfer Nate Noel from Appalachian State, linebacker Khalil Jacobs from South Alabama, and offensive lineman Marcus Bryant and Caden Green, who are both currently starters. They also got an insurance policy at quarterback in Drew Pine, a starting corner in Toriano Pride Jr., and then a couple of other guys who are currently backups or occasional starters on defense. They also returned Theo Weiss at wide receiver, and Mizzou was setting up for a tremendous 2024 season. They started out in the top 10 in the preseason rankings, and in weeks 1 and week 2, they looked incredible. The first game would come on a Thursday night against Murray State, and the Racers had a new head coach, and of course it wasn't competitive. Mizzou won 51-0, and for the most part the team was pretty vanilla and didn't do anything crazy, and no one had that absurd of a game. In week 2, they would once again return to Columbia and play against the Buffalo Bulls. Buffalo looks like a decent team right now, and Mizzou made them look silly, winning 38-0. Still though, there wasn't that much explosiveness from the offense, as Brady Cook only had 228 yards and did not have a passing score. So far, the running game and the defense were the two things that everybody was talking about, and in week 3 they'd be tested. Boston College was led by new head coach Bill O'Brien, and they had a tough quarterback to bring down in Thomas Castellanos. They're also fresh off of an upset against Florida State, who we all thought was pretty good, so this game was sort of seen as an upset watch type game. Boston College came in ranked at number 24, and they came to play. In the first half, Boston College looked like the much better team as they ultimately got off to a 14-3 lead, and it was epitomized by a 67-yard touchdown by Thomas Castellanos to Reed Harris. From there, it seemed to wake Mizzou up, as in the last 5 minutes of the second quarter, they scored 2 field goals, and Luther Burden had a 19-yard touchdown. Mizzou took a 17-14 lead. In the second half, Brady Cook had a touchdown in the third quarter, and then they would finish the game with a field goal. Boston College would end up scoring a touchdown late, and then Mizzou would run the clock out. It was a little bit concerning though. It was a little bit too close for comfort for Mizzou fans, and then this week was really too close for comfort. Against a Vanderbilt team who's usually at the bottom of the conference, they got off to a strong start. Vanderbilt had a 65-yard touchdown in the first quarter, and Mizzou didn't score until the end of the first quarter. It was 7-7. In quarter number 2, Vanderbilt and Mizzou traded back and forth with field goals, and then right before the half, Mizzou made a dumb decision to go for it on 4th down from midfield. They didn't end up getting it, and then Vanderbilt got a free 57-yard field goal out of it. Vanderbilt's kicker Brock Taylor was looking really good so far, and if he could hit from 57 yards out, he could probably hit from anywhere. In the third quarter, Mizzou was still stagnating, as they would end up having a field goal, and then Marcus Carroll would punch it in for a touchdown, and Mizzou would go up by 7. Right as the third quarter ended, though, Vanderbilt would drive down the field and score. After a couple missed field goals in a row, Mizzou found themselves tied with Vandy late into the fourth quarter. Ultimately, neither team could end up putting points on the board, and the game would have to go to overtime. In overtime, Vanderbilt would steadily go down the field and ultimately finish with a 2-yard touchdown pass to take a 7-point lead. Mizzou wasted no time, as Luther Burden had a 25-yard touchdown catch from Brady Cook the following play, and we are now knotted up going into second overtime. Mizzou would end up stalling out and would have to settle for a field goal. At this point, I was completely sweating, and I thought for sure Vanderbilt was going to go down the field and score. Luckily, after an offensive PI, Vanderbilt would be stuck, and ultimately they would have to settle for a field goal as well. Brock Taylor had been efficient this game hitting his field goals, and ultimately all he had to do was kick a chip shot in, and they could go to a third overtime and battle it out with 2-point conversions. Well, the luck was on the side of Mizzou in this game, as he ended up hooking it to the left, and Mizzou would survive 30-27. While they were 4-0 with a 1-0 mark in the conference, the national media and Mizzou fans were not happy. It essentially felt like a loss, but it ended up counting as a win, and it shows that there is a lot of problems on this Mizzou team that need to get addressed if they still want to go to the college football playoff. I've ultimately come up with 3 things that I'm concerned about for Mizzou football that absolutely have to be addressed. 1, I think it's the hype of the team in general and the attitude. Mizzou football thinks they are currently better than they are. Most of the guys who helped Mizzou break out last season were dudes who were under-recruited, were guys who hadn't won a lot of games, or were hoping to finally win games. They ended up having their breakout season, and now it seems that the mentality is that Mizzou deserves to be there with the big boys and that they are guaranteed a playoff spot and wins. While they did have those shutouts in weeks 1 and week 2, the team has played a little bit scared since then, and they're not dominating each and every play and trying as hard as they can every single play like they did last year. I think the mentality needs to change, and after 2 close scares in back-to-back weeks, I think this will finally get through to their head that they need to step up and take each snap more seriously. The second problem is honestly on defense, as they're giving up way too many big plays. It seems that the only way that teams score on Mizzou is by having these big highlight reel plays, and that has to stop. SEC teams have plenty of really skilled playmakers who are going to make Mizzou pay if they can't stop the big play. Mizzou's defense hasn't really been that big of a problem, but they're going to have to get that fixed. Third, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the passing game. Yes, the offensive line has had a couple of question marks, as Marcus Bryant has been a little bit underwhelming, and Cameron Johnson has also been struggling. Still though, Mizzou is running the ball really well, as Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll have been terrific, and that leads us to the fact that the passing game just has to get better. I don't know if Brady Cook is hurt or something, but he's just not playing that well. The deep ball is pretty much non-existent, and for the most part, the offense has looked a little bit scared. They've been especially bad in the red zone this year, and it just seems like something is a little bit off. I'm not quite sure what it is, but that absolutely has to get better. Brady Cook is definitely better than this, and while last year he wasn't perfect, he should be improving and not regressing. Maybe there's some sort of injury or some sort of scheme change that I don't know about, but the Mizzou offense, especially the passing game, has just not looked the same, and they're not finishing it when they get into the red zone. That absolutely has to get better, and a couple of these big name offensive linemen also need to play better. One guy that everyone was worried about was Connor Tollison, but he's actually played pretty good, and the running backs have stepped in tremendously for the void that Cody Schrader left. The receiving room is playing really well, as Theo Weiss has had a big year, but still Luther Burden has been a little bit underwhelming because they don't get him the ball enough. He's the best player on the field each and every week, and he should be getting more touches than he's getting now. Honestly, those are my 3 issues with Mizzou. I think there needs to be a mentality change, the defense has to stop giving up big plays, and the offense needs to get the ball to their best players, be more explosive, and finish in the red zone. If they do all 3 of those things, they can easily make the college football playoff this year. In 2 weeks, they go on the road to play against Texas A&M, who I'm still not sold is all that good, and while that game could be tricky, I do think Mizzou ends up pulling that out. They also then get to go on the road to play against UMass, which should be a win, and then they get to play an Auburn team at home, who's also not looked very good. At that point, Mizzou honestly should be 7-0, going into a showdown at number 4 Alabama. Well, ultimately, I think Bama will beat Mizzou. That'll be like last year's Georgia game, and Mizzou will have to bounce back in a big way after that. Their final 4 games include a game against number 21 Oklahoma, who I think is only going to get worse throughout the year, and then a tough road game against South Carolina. That game is looking more and more like a trap game as the season goes on, and South Carolina has lost a couple times in a row to Mizzou, so they could be sneaky and dangerous to pull off an upset there. After that, though, they play against Mississippi State, who's the worst team in the conference. Then they come home and play against Arkansas. Arkansas has looked solid, but with this game being at home, I think Mizzou should be able to handle them. Honestly, my projection at this point is still that Mizzou ends up going 11-1 with a loss to Bama. I'm still concerned about road games against A&M and South Carolina though, as that could easily be a trap performance. If they play the way they played against Vanderbilt, I think they only get maybe 4 more wins, but honestly, this Mizzou team has all the pieces. They have an experienced quarterback, they have a good coach, they have an insane playmaker, a good pass rush, a good defense, an offensive line with a lot of potential, and a couple of workhorse running backs. There's not much much more they need and combine that with a favorable schedule, and Mizzou still has a good shot at making the playoff, but they have to fix these issues this upcoming bye week and do it urgently. If not, they're going to get caught sleepwalking and could lose the game to Texas A&M, and everything from there becomes much more difficult. But what do you guys think? If you're a Mizzou fan like me, what needs to change for this team, and what has been the problem so far? Also, if you're a fan of another school, give me your thoughts on the Mizzou Tigers this year and what other topic I could cover in my next video. Also, before you go, don't forget to also leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen, including my video about the downfall of Kansas football this year. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.